What's up, you sweaty nerds and greasy degenerates? Argenti is coming out in Honkai Star Rail really darn soon, so it's time to go over a pre-release guide for our Argenti. You get it? Because our general... Just watch the video. Alright, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the light cones that we can slap onto our Argenti. Starting off with his signature light cone here, which was revealed to us the other day on the Honkai Star Rail official Twitter. This is what it looks like, and if we scroll down, we can get the description. It increases the wearer's crit damage by 36% when the wearer uses their ultimate. The wearer's ultimate damage increases based on their max energy. Ultimate damage increases by 0.36% per point of energy up to 180 energy. So this last part here does stack up to a pretty, well, not stack up, but it does add up to a pretty large number. It's about 64% or so, which is a pretty good number. However, it is attached to his ultimate only, so that does kind of hold it back a little bit. However, this does still seem to be his best in slot light cone. Every 5-star character releases with a signature that typically is their best in slot light cone. But the best effect on here is this crit damage value of 36%, and signature light cones typically give us a good hint into what the character's kit will be and how you might want to build the character's relics out as well. For example, if you see a lot of crit damage here, Argenti probably gives himself a little bit of crit rate, and then you want to build heavily into crit damage as a result. Just like with Jing Liu, she gives herself a ton of crit rate, so you build a ton of crit damage on her and she pops off queen. And we already know this because Argenti's talent and one of his traces gives him crit rate. For every enemy hit, when Argenti uses his basic attack skill or ultimate, it regenerates Argenti's energy and grants him a set number of apotheosis stacks, increasing his crit rate. This effect is stackable up to a certain amount. So these apotheosis stacks are what give him the crit rate, and we can see from one of his traces, at the start of a turn, immediately gains a set number of apotheosis stacks. So he gives himself a bunch of crit rate. So you want to build his relics and, try to find maybe a light cone that can give him some crit damage. So that's why his signature does have that. There you go, 36% crit damage. So with that in mind, we can take a look at some of these other light cones to see what might be pretty good for him. You might notice Jing Yuan's light cone does the exact same crit value, which is kind of nice. However, the second effect here is not as good as Argenti's signature for Argenti, because it does give you a good damage bonus to the ultimate, but it also kind of leans into like follow-up attack triggers and stuff, so that might not be as helpful to us as Argenti's signature would be, for example. And we can take a look at this light cone here. Today is another peaceful day. Just be aware that today is another peaceful day is attached to the battle pass. So that's why some of you might not necessarily recognize this cone, because if you don't have the battle pass, you can't even get this cone. So just be aware of that. However, I really like this cone for Argenti. After entering battle, it increases the wearer's damage based on their max energy. Damage increases by 0.40% per point of energy up to 160 energy. This is at Superimposition 5. And this is a really darn good cone. This was pointed out to me by a viewer to be one of his best in slots. I was already aware of that, but they were doing some calcs and found out that this is just shy of being as good as his signature. So don't feel like you have to pull Argenti's signature. There are other really great options. We already know this from previous situations with characters. You don't have to have the signature, but it is really nice to know that there are other really great options that work. So consider today is another peaceful day if you have it. Just don't forget you want it at Superimposition 5, or it simply isn't as good. Another light cone. This is probably going to be the most used light cone on Argenti because it is very accessible, is the Seriousness of Breakfast. This is craftable in the Forgotten Hall system. Everybody can get their hands on it, and it's been a very solid light cone for just about any erudition character. At Superimposition 5, it increases the wearer's damage by 24%. For every enemy defeated by the wearer's attack is increased by 8%, stacking up to 3 times. Argenti deals AoE damage he's going to have this extra effect active like all the time, so it's going to be pretty darn good. Also, it has pom-pom on it and sandwiches and a picture of March 7th, so how could you possibly go wrong? It's cute. So that's probably going to be like the most used light cone on Argenti, not because it's the best, just because it's the most accessible and easy to take to S5. I personally like his signature as the best. Then I'd probably say today's another Peaceful Days just below that. And then probably a toss-up between Jing Yuan's light cone and the Seriousness of Breakfast. Actually, Jing Yuan's is probably better than Seriousness of Breakfast if you happen to have it. Seriousness of Breakfast, very solid option though. Don't feel like you're settling for something bad by using it. It's very good at S5. There's also Himiko's light cone. For every enemy on the field, it increases the wearer's attack by 9% up to 5 stacks. When an enemy is inflicted with weakness break, the damage dealt by the wearer increases by 30% for 1 turn. Some players pull a lot on light cone banner, so you might have this at S5, making this a little bit better, but I don't like this light cone for Argenti as much as the other light cones that we have available. And some of these other light cones might not be quite as good. You do see Genius's Repose is not so bad. At S5, it actually gives you a pretty solid amount of crit damage. It is set to a certain amount of turns though, so just be aware that it might not be as good in the later part of battles if all the enemies are gone and you're stuck with one big boss at the end. This will start to not be as good, but it's a very solid option. The Birth of the Self, not as good because this is about follow-up attacks. He don't do that. Make the World Clamor just simply not as good of a cone as the others for Argenti. That's the light cones. There you go. All right, let's take a look at some of the different relic sets that we can put onto Argenti. We're going to go over the relic sets first, then main stats, and then substats after that. So, of course, Argenti being a physical type damage dealer, we're going to want to consider using the physical type set for him. The 4-piece set, or sorry, the 2-piece gives him a physical damage boost of 10%, nothing to slouch on, and the 4-piece, after the wearer attacks or is hit, either or, their attack increases by 5% for the rest of the battle. This effect can stack up to 5 times, and like it said earlier, will be there the rest of the battle, which is very solid, so this builds into a pretty fat, juicy damage multiplier the more it goes on. And so definitely consider using the 4-piece if you can. Now, you may be aware this game's most important stat is probably speed. So I would very highly recommend trying to get to 134 speed or higher so that you can get some extra turns in. A lot of people, for example, if you're looking at the boots, a lot of people want to throw attack boots in where they can. However, unfortunately, if you don't get fast enough, you won't get as many turns as you would with a 134 threshold character or higher. And having that 134 speed or higher does give you some extra turns, and in the end will typically give you more damage overall than having the attack boots. But if you can get good enough substats, then you might not have to use the speed boots. You can probably use attack boots. Just something to be aware of there. So that's one reason why you may want to also potentially use a different set than this set if you didn't get good enough stats. If you know, everybody has different drops in this game, so you may have to use whatever you can. For example, if you take a look at this Musketeer set here, and just be aware, forget about some of these, you know, stats you see on some of these relics here. These are just placeholders so that I can just show you guys stuff. But I mean, take a look at this hat. This hat has crit damage, crit rate, attack percent, and flat attack. I mean, this thing's cracked. Why didn't I even... Why haven't I leveled this yet, right? So this is a really solid... this is a really solid hat. If you have an amazing stats on a certain set, you might be able to use a certain set as a placeholder while you build up and farm out better relics for your character. So don't feel too bad if you have to use something like the 4-piece Wild Wheat. For example, the 2-piece gives you an attack increase of 12%, which isn't bad. This will help the overall damage. And the 4-piece gives you a 6% speed boost, and if you happen to use a basic attack, it will give you a 10% bonus on that as well. So again, stats matter. Sometimes your substats are so darn good, it makes up for the fact that maybe you're not using the most ideal main 4-piece set. So just be aware of that, okay? There's nothing wrong with having to use like something like the Musketeer set as a placeholder while you farm out something better, like maybe a 4-piece set of the physical set while you are building your Argenti. Because most people have a pretty solid setup. Most people have a ton of these really good Musketeer set stuff lying around, so you can probably slap something like that on him at the start while you build up something better like this. You may even want to use a 2-piece physical, 2-piece speed set if you haven't been able to reach that threshold and haven't gotten good enough substats. Your substats can really make or break what your strategy is for the relic sets that you're going to end up using. Now let's talk about the planar sets. The best set, in my opinion, to use on him is probably going to be Rudolent Arena. Rudolent Arena 2-piece increases the wearer's crit rate by 8%. When the wearer's current crit rate reaches 70% or higher, the wearer's basic attack and skill damage increase by 20%. The downside of this set is that it is sometimes hard to get to this 70% crit value for some players. But if you can, there's a huge payoff for it, and you'll deal a very high amount of damage as a result. Most DPS characters are going to be spamming their skill, so this is typically most main DPS characters' best planar ornament set right now. Of course, there are some exceptions. However, in Argenti's case, this is probably his best in slot planar set to be able to use at this current moment in time. He does have a really powerful ultimate, so don't feel like terrible if you wanted to use something like Solsato for the time being. If you happen to have a good set already leveled up for him, don't feel bad about having to use it. The only problem is this does have follow-up synergy on it as well, and he doesn't do any follow-up attack damage. You're mostly only helping his ultimate if you use this. Just be aware of that. Some Sela players still use this because she gets her ultimate really often. The problem with Argenti is that his ultimate has such a high energy cost that he's not probably going to be using it as often as you might want. So honestly, believe it or not, the new planar set might be even better than Solsato. The 2-piece increases the attack by 12%, and when the wearer's speed is equal to or higher than 135, that's one threshold, there's also 160 at another threshold. So you could be dealing an extra 12% damage or 18% damage respectively. Overall damage multipliers are better than stat multipliers like this attack at the top. So consider this set if you haven't been able to get your Rudolent Arena working. I personally like Rudolent Arena the most. Then I'd probably honestly use a really solid version of this new Firmament Frontline. You could also use Solsato, but I think Solsato is not as good as the other two. I think Rudolent Arena is Argenti's best planar set to potentially be able to use. Now let's talk about some main stats right now. Because Argenti gives himself so much crit rate through his own skill as an effect, you can probably go ahead and put a crit damage body on him and just build super heavily into crit damage. This is really easy to do on a character like Jing Liu, and it seems like Argenti is being set up to be a character that you can build in a similar fashion. Very high crit damage, and he'll boost his own crit rate really high too. So as long as you're reaching his crit rate value of, so like, let's just say, right, you're using Rudolent Arena. As long as you get to 70% crit rate, then this is going to pop off. And you're going to have, and 70% crit rate, by the way, is plenty of crit rate to be able to now focus everything else in on crit damage. So I heavily recommend using a crit damage body, and I recommend using a physical damage boost planar sphere. I heavily recommend using an attack percent rope. Some people might argue that energy rope is good for him too, because it'll help him get to his ultimate faster. I kind of like that idea, but I don't know if he really needs it, because he does have a lot of effects that give him extra energy in battle as well. I think it's worth maybe testing him out a little bit when he comes out to find out if you need that energy rope or not. I personally think he'll probably be okay as long as he's built fast enough. He'll get some extra turns, getting some extra energy anyway, and he's going to be dealing AoE damage, so he's going to be clearing mobs very often, also giving him a ton of extra energy. I don't think he needs the energy rope. I think attack percent rope is fine. And again, like I was saying, if you get good enough substats, you can build an attack boot. But don't forget that if you need the extra speed, of course, go ahead and build a speed boot. And there's a lot of ways to get extra speed on the character. Like we were saying earlier, the 4-piece musketeer gives you some extra speed. Don't forget, of course, the 2-piece hacker space would also give you some extra speed as well, and that gives you room to use the 2-piece physical set as well. So those are some main stats to look into. Let's go over some substats. Of course, you're going to want to get crit damage, crit rate, attack percent. In this case, flat attack, in this case, flat attack's fine because look how good this hat is. But of course, you're also going to want speed on the character as well. Of course, you're going to want a ton of speed, maybe like break effect, maybe effect res, defense. Those are all things that I would worry about less. I'd focus mostly on trying to get up that crit damage, crit rate, attack percent, and, maybe some break effect, something like that. And speed. Speed is also a very important stat to get on your character as well. Every single character wants speed. It's like the best stat in the game. And as far as good character synergies go, you're going to be looking at supports for Argenti because he's a main DPS character and does AoE damage specifically. So you're going to want to most of the time buff your Argenti with your supports because you're going to get a lot out of it, right? He is an AoE damage dealer. He hits all the enemies at once most of the time, right? So you're going to get a lot out of it. You buff Argenti, and he gets to deal a ton of damage on all the enemies at once. So buffing him is really good. So Bronya, right? Bronya's a very, very good support for Argenti. Because of this, she's one of the best in the game. You have Ting Yun, who's probably going to end up being his best support, at least with the available characters right now, because she can give him energy, she can buff him in 2 different ways, and she's hot. So I just figured, once again, mentioning Ting Yun, probably my favorite character in the whole game. So we also have Pela, who is a debuffer, not a buffer, but she does debuff all the enemies at once with her ult, which is like her main, like, that's the bread and butter that she brings to the table. You know what I mean? She is a very solid debuffer of all enemies. So, of course, you have your Silver Wolves of the world, but I don't think she's as strong for Argenti as even someone like Pela or, Ting Yun and Bronya. Of course, if you have her, definitely a good option, just maybe not quite as synergetic as maybe the rest that we've already mentioned up to this point. You have Asta, which buffs like kind of everybody at once and can give you that extra speed you want. However, again, similar to Silverwolf, I don't think she's as synergetic as someone like Ting Yun would be, or someone like Bronya, or someone like Pela would be. Those are probably my 3 best picks right now for the support slot for Argenti at this time. So let me know if you think I may have missed anything in this video. Put it in the comments down below. I always appreciate any extra help, and I'm not perfect. I make mistakes sometimes. Anyways, let me know if you're pulling for Argenti. If you are, I wish you the best of luck on your pulls, and if you found this video helpful in any way, shape, or form, please consider leaving a like and subscribe. Anyways, I'll catch you next time. Peace out.